Good afternoon, and welcome to the Tennessee edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics and you will see the agenda for our hour together. Everyone has been muted, so no need to worry about background noise on your end. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you would do so using the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you look up at the top of that, there's an orange arrow. If you click on that, that minimizes it, and click on it and expands it again. When it's expanded, you will see a questions tab in there. If you click on the little box on the far right-hand side, that questions tab will pop out, so you can write your question or comment in there. And we are leaving time at the end of the webinar for questions. Looking at that control panel, you also see a handout section. If you pop that out, you can get to both a link to the full report with all of the national information and a lot of state findings. And you will also see a 2-page summary for Tennessee that we will be talking about a little bit later. The last thing to point out is if that control panel is in your way when we get into the maps, when we are on the website, again, feel free to minimize it with that control panel orange arrow. And lastly, we are recording this session and we will send a link to the recording to everybody who is registered. Please feel free to share that with anyone that you feel would be interested in these findings. And so with that, let me introduce myself and my co-hosts. I'm Chris Coffin. I direct AFT's National Agricultural Land Network, which was created a couple of years ago to help build the capacity of folks who are working to save farmland. It is a free network. I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. We hope that everybody who is interested in learning more about ways to save farmland, not just permanent protection, but looking at the breadth of tools that are available to reduce the footprints of development on farmland, we welcome you to join us. I also am AFT Senior Policy Advisor. My specialties are farmland protection, land access, farm transfer, and farm viability. So co-hosting with me today are Billy Van Pelt and Brooks Lamb. Billy is AFT's Director of Special Program Development and Senior Advisor. Billy is a licensed landscape architect and has been working on land use and farmland protection for over 25 years. Brooks is currently AFT's Program Associate and Special Assistant to the President. He focuses much of his effort on farmland protection, farm access, and heirs property. His family has a farm in Marshall County, Tennessee, where they've been for generations. So I'm going to turn it over to Billy to introduce our special guest in a minute, but let me just take a minute to talk about American Farmland Trust for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are also the only national agricultural land trust, and we do land projects. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. The bumper sticker we had before this one, though, said, "It's not farmland without farmers." We understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives and our regional programs focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but on the practices being used on that land and on the farmers and ranchers who steward that land, both ones on the land now and those who aspire to be in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy analysis and advocacy. We like to say we work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress. We have 6 regional offices and a national office headquartered in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now I would like to introduce a special guest who has joined us today. Charlie Hatcher is the Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. He was appointed by Governor Bill Lee. Dr. Hatcher is a 10th generation American farmer and a 5th generation Tennessee farmer. Prior to becoming commissioner, he served for 10 years as the state veterinarian for the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. In that role, he protected the health and welfare of animals within the state and promoted the marketability of animals and animal products. Dr. Hatcher founded Rock and Country Veterinary Services in College Grove, Tennessee in 1993, specializing in livestock. Thank you so much for joining us today, Commissioner Hatcher. You've had a chance to review the summary findings from this report, and I have 3 questions to share with you. First, what struck you most about the findings?
Billy, thank you for that introduction. Also, thank you to American Farmland Trust. But I was going to say a 30-second comment before we get into that. So, Tennessee, it's a blessing and a curse, but we're one of the, if not the most moved to state in the country, one of the most. And agriculture and forestry together are the #1 industry in the state of Tennessee by far. But that is under threat. It's my goal to keep those industries #1 over the next 10 years. We have also the most rapidly growing economy of any state in the U.S. The governor told me that the other day. So we've got that on one side, and we also got the challenge of providing opportunity to some of our western counties and some of the counties across the state of Tennessee, the rural counties, that haven't had opportunity, or even in some cases had decrease in population for the last 3 decades. So we want to try to achieve, where's that balance of this urbanization and where's a practical place that we can land? And so I've been sounding the alarm about that, and that's in our plans. But as far as what this report showed, I first became informed of the 2016 report at our SASDA meeting, and that really piqued my interest. And at that point, I sent that report to our governor and our COO, and they became concerned as well. And this report just confirms my fears of what I thought. You know, Tennessee was the 4th, and don't take this negatively, the 4th worst in the country as far as loss of high value ag and forestry land, but that's really what it is. And I suspect that we might move up the list. I don't know if that's entirely confirmed, but if we stay on this path, I know you've got different scenarios of best case and maybe where we're going if we don't change our ways. I doubt Tennessee would be, the #1 industry would be ag and forestry in even 10 years if we don't have a balanced attack. So I appreciate this report, because this administration, at least in Tennessee, bases their decisions based on evidence. And we have that evidence, and this data is critical to what decisions we're going to make in the future. That's a long-winded answer, but that's where we are.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your reaction to our findings. The second question, how do you think this research can be used by the folks who have joined us on this webinar today to help save farmland?
I think it's ammunition for a call to arms about, you know, what can we do on all aspects, and try to use, we're going to have to use every tool in the toolbox. You know, another alarming thing that we're faced with, I don't know if you saw it, but over half of America's farmers will reach retirement age in the next 10 years. And so think about that for a minute. So we need to recruit future farmers and beginning farmers from all walks of life, every race, creed, color, stage of affluence and all, if we have any hopes of a bright future for agriculture.
Thank you, Commissioner. And lastly, what steps would you like to see state or local governments or even the federal government take to reduce the conversion of farmland?
Well, that's a tough question. I could talk about that. I think we have to be careful that it doesn't look like too much government intervention. I think we need to start with the stakeholders so that they realize what the problem is in the impact of the threat and what the threat's going to do. And we need to have some kind of concerted, in my opinion, at least hopefully we can approach it that way in Tennessee, is how do we need to develop a task force with all stakeholders to try to come up with a plan using this information to attack it and using all the tools we have in our toolbox.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate your insights and your feedback to this data. And now I'm turning it back over to Chris.
Great. Thank you, Billy, and thank you so much, Commissioner. We are so glad that you are staying with us through the webinar. We will come look to you again for some comments toward the end. And with that, all of us are going to go off camera so that the slides can be seen at full screen as well as the maps when we get to the website. So let's dive into the methodology and findings from the report. The first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, which we released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land. First, we looked at conversion from 1992 to 2012, and then at conversion from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward. We're using that past conversion data, the data from 2001 to 2016, to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. So we started with that analysis of conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types, urban and high density land use and low density residential development. So let's take a minute to talk about what those are. Urban and highly developed land is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. It's been mapped and tracked for many years. It includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also, though, includes rural industrial sites, such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low-density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit of farmland conversion, and AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. So these types of areas range from lower density subdivisions to larger farmettes and ranchettes. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms that remain. It's important to note, though, that some agriculture can be found on low-density residential land, and some smaller farm parcels, especially those near urban centers, can be profitable and quite sustainable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential use, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and highly developed land. So, starting with this historical data, we projected into the future with the business as usual scenario. Basically, this is a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented from 2001 to 2016 to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off of that scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, and we'll get to those in a minute. For each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had a projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios in two different ways. First, on what type of agricultural land was likely to be converted, cropland, pasture land, woodland, as well as on the quality of the land that is likely to be converted, and we will get to that in a minute. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning. Why? Because land use regulations are inherently local and there is no national database of them. This means that our maps represent a general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those historic conversion patterns. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground right now through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of water scarcity or salinization. Mapping this impact is complex and was beyond the scope of our analysis. You'll see in the website, though, when we get there, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections around water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual. Again, that's that straight line projection out to 2040. The second scenario is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse, which we can imagine that it will because of high housing costs in more urban areas and more opportunity for remote work, which will only be improved as rural broadband expands. We know that some parts of the country may already be on this trajectory. Lastly, we modeled the future we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive ag land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some agricultural land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So let's look really quickly at the assumptions that went into these scenarios. For business as usual, as I said, it was this historical rate of conversion. We adjusted the urban and highly developed conversion rate for future population growth. And that is because there is a strong correlation between population growth and the way that cities and towns convert land. In runaway sprawl, you'll see that we left that urban and high density development rate the same, but the rate of projected conversion on that low density residential development, we bumped up by 50% on the assumption that this is in many places the type of sprawl that we are seeing that is fueling conversion. And then lastly, you see for better built cities, we projected a decline in the rate of conversion from that business as usual. We dropped it by 25% in the urban and highly developed land category, again, because we know that towns and cities can grow compactly, and that's a number that we knew is achievable. That 50% lower is something that we thought was ambitious but achievable, that if communities could do a better job of reducing the footprint of development. So let's now look at each scenario's potential impact. The gray bars on the left show the 11 million acres that were converted just in the first 16 years of this century. Then you see what the projections are. In the business as usual scenario, the potential for Conversion is 18.4 million, and for Runaway Sprawl, it's up to 24.4 million. And you see that if we were to adopt more compact development and smart growth, we could reduce that impact down to 11 million acres. So you may be thinking 11 million acres, that's still a lot. Is that really the best case scenario? AFT appreciates that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for affordable housing options is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, and we hope they can be, we chose what we believed to be a realistic scenario. These next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Tennessee compares to other states. This slide shows projected total acres converted by county. The darker the rust, the very dark, the more acres of conversion. And you can see here, obviously, given the size and scale of agriculture in the southwest part of the country, why that's very deep, dark rust. You see quite a bit of projected acres converted in Tennessee, even in this map. And if you go to the next map, which is the projected percent of conversion, you can see here that it is very significant in Tennessee as it is in other states on the eastern part of the US. Looking at it a different way, you'll see in this next chart, and it was something that the commissioner spoke to, this is not a top 12 list that you want to see your state on. These are the 12 states that have the most projected conversion, and Tennessee is number 3 on this list with a projected conversion of over 1 million acres of farmland. And you can see here on the right that that represents 8.2% of Tennessee's current agricultural land base. Moving on, another key finding relates to impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, what we called the PVR index. Land over a certain PVR threshold we consider to be nationally significant land, and that's what this map is of. Land that is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all ag land for precisely the same reason why it's such productive land, because it's flat, it's well drained, it's relatively free of rocks, makes it very easily developable. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impact. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on this nationally significant land, even though it represents less than 40% of the land base. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acres of land in the US devoted to all fruit and nut and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. So this next slide shows another top 12 list you don't want to see your state on. Here you see on this high quality land, as Commissioner Hatcher referred to it, the potential conversion of acres of what we call nationally significant land is over 400,000 acres. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brooks to talk through the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Chris. So one of the other threats that we're highlighting with this report is the impact that solar development poses to agricultural land. And to be clear, American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy, but we think it's essential to plan its placement really carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land isn't compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways, such as through agrivoltaics or farming and producing solar energy on the same land area. So this map shows the projected acres of utility scale solar energy generation facilities by state in 2040. And this data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Futures study. And that study estimates there will need to be about 7.4 million acres of utility scale solar in place by 2040 to meet renewable energy goals. And as you can see, these projections do show less solar growth in Tennessee than in other southern states. If we go to our next map, you'll see the percentage of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on that same Department of Energy Solar Futures study. Now, we did model conversion of land to solar development, but we didn't include that layer in this report because of questions about the data. Now, that said, there is some information about the solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that's available through the Farmland Information Center, the FIC. And we'll also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. And the most important findings from that paper are that 83% of projected U.S. solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land. And nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. And these findings underscore the reasons for American Farmland Trust's involvement in this realm. So moving on, we're now going to dive into the data available for Tennessee on the interactive website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our wonderful colleague, Beth Frazier, who will be our expert website navigator. Thank you, Beth.
Great. Thank you so much, Brooks, and thank you, Beth. Okay, when you get to the website, and here we are, this is the cover, this is what you will see at first. This is a very quick summary of helpful information, what we found, what we did. To get out of this, you just click on this little X on the upper right-hand side, takes you to the maps. To get it back, you go up to the right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll see that About tab, and that will take you right back to it. So let's focus for a minute up here on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Next to the About tab, you see How To. That is a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers for these scenarios. Next to that, you see a View Report tab. That takes you to our Farmland Information Center, where Beth is taking us right now. And you see here this is another way to link to the full report, to the executive summary, to that solar technical report that Brooks just spoke about, to our former State of the States report, which has a state policy scorecard. Lots of information that you can find there. Next to that is a Request Data tab. That is allowing folks to request any of the data layers that you find in these maps and in the report. We are making them available to people who would like them. So please, if you do, fill out the form and we will be back in touch. So with that, now Beth is going to take us on into Tennessee. All you do is you click on the state, and when you click on it, you will automatically see that information populates underneath it. So there you see the Tennessee information as the state as a whole on the left-hand side, and Wilson County on the right, and it happened to be that Beth's cursor was on Wilson County when she clicked on the state, so that's why that county comes up. So, but it's useful because you see here that we have county level data as well as state level data, and we hope that this will be particularly valuable for folks at the county level. So let's take a minute on this page to show what you can see here. And here you see the 3 scenarios and a likely conversion. Again, in the business as usual, it's a little over 1 million acres. Runaway Sprawl, it's 1.4 million acres. And again, better built cities can be significantly less than that. You see here the difference in the colors. The very dark rust is the urban and highly developed land, and the lighter orange is low density residential development. And as you can see in Tennessee, it is that low density sprawl that is going to be the primary driver of conversion in the state as a whole. When you look here at Wilson County, that dynamic is a little bit different. There's more estimated urban and highly developed land as a percent of total conversion, and every county will be a little different in that way. Going down, let's look at some of the ways that conversion is going to occur. Back to this question of what quality of land is going to be converted. The projections show that, again, under each of these scenarios, it's a significant amount of conversion on some of Tennessee's best high-value land. In the business as usual, it's 525,600 acres. And again, you can see those different numbers. Looking at the type of land that is likely to be impacted here, you see statewide that pasture land is where a little bit more comparatively of the conversion is likely to happen, followed by cropland not far behind, and followed by woodland. And let me make a note about the woodland. This is obviously not all of the forest land conversion that is likely to happen in Tennessee. This is woodland associated with a farm. And in the 2020 Farms Under Threat State of the States report, we came up with a way of modeling conversion of woodland associated with a farm. So these are acres that, again, are attached to a farm, and with the likely loss of some of that land, there would be loss of associated woodland. And lastly, down here at the bottom, it's important to point out that this LDR, low density residential land use, paves the way for further development. And what we found in Tennessee is that it's 6 times more likely, if land in 2016 was in low density residential development, that it is 6 times more likely to be converted to urban and high density development by 2040. So let me point out one more thing before I hand it to Brooks, and this is the download report. You see this blue tab here. We're going to go to what this state summary is because we hope it's a very useful information education tool that all of you can use with your members, with your legislators, and with anyone else that you think would be interested in this information. Again, here you see the same numbers about the numbers of acres projected for conversion, but let me point out these numbers in the middle. Using the 2017 Census of Agriculture, we converted that impact of 1 million acres of land potentially converted into what is going to be the economic impact and the other impacts on the agricultural industry. Again, as Commissioner Hatcher was talking about the importance of the industry, we project that there would be 8,700 farms that could be lost, a reduction in farm output of 258 million, and a potential loss of 14,600 jobs associated with the agricultural sector. And then if you look to the right, the hardest hit counties in acres potentially converted are these 3 counties. And I think that Brooks is going to take us to some of these as we get into the maps. And as you just go down further, you see here there's more information in this 2-pager. Again, we hope that you find it useful and can download it and print it out easily and share it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brooks to, with Beth's help, take us into Tennessee and a few of the counties.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. So we're going to do a quick dive into 3 different counties throughout the state. We're going to look at one in Middle Tennessee, we'll look at one in East Tennessee, and then we'll go over to West Tennessee. And we'll start with one of those that's listed as the 3 hardest hit counties in the state, and that's Rutherford County, just southeast of Nashville. So Beth, if you can zoom on in, that would be wonderful. And once you get settled there, Beth, if you can go to that top left-hand corner in the leftmost map and click on Runaway Sprawl so we can see what it looks like under what we're calling the worst case situation. And then if you can go to the map on the right, Beth, and click that same area and go to the better built cities situation so we can compare and contrast the worst case situation with what we're describing as the best case situation. And so, as you can see here, Rutherford County faces a lot of threats to its agricultural land. If you look at the map on the left, you'll see a few things that aren't necessarily surprising. So you see areas between Murfreesboro and Nashville that are really, really lit up in orange and red. And again, not necessarily a surprise that places like Smyrna and the northwestern edge of Murfreesboro are growing. What is surprising is the extent to which they're growing. If you take a look, especially around the entire periphery of Murfreesboro, you see that orange color, that low density residential development, really, really spreading out for miles and miles on the outskirts of the city. So that is definitely a major concern. But I want to point your attention to something else really quickly too. If we actually look away from Murfreesboro, and Beth, if you look in the southwestern corner of the county, can zoom in a bit there. Yeah, right in that general area, if you can zoom there. You see a little town pop up, that's Eagleville, Tennessee. That's actually just a few miles from where my family's farm is located in Marshall County. And you see lots of low density residential development popping up in that area too. So yes, we're seeing this tremendous amount of growth and farmland conversion around major cities like Murfreesboro, but we're also seeing it in more rural areas too. And it's perhaps even more insidious in some of those places. So that is a quick glimpse into the situation for Rutherford County. Beth, if we can zoom on out, head down I-40 East, and we'll get over towards Greene County over in East Tennessee, and we'll zoom in there. And Greene County, not the most rural county in the state for sure, but definitely far more rural than Rutherford County, given recent growth trends from Nashville and Murfreesboro. But we wanted to pick a place too that didn't have a major city to highlight how farmland loss and farmland conversion are shaping communities throughout the state. And yes, Greene County does have Greenville, important town, but it's not quite as big as Murfreesboro. So we thought we'd look at the impacts here. And if you look at the graphs, especially, you see that there's very little urban and highly developed land conversion happen in Greene County. But what you see, and you see tens of thousands of acres of it, is lots of this low density residential development. It's happening in some places where one might expect. It's happening on the outskirts of Greenville. It's happening along interstate corridors, but it's really also happening throughout the county. And again, a very important county here, one of the top beef producing counties in the state. And so it's showing that a lot of the pasture land, a lot of the rich soils that are in Greene County that support that agricultural industry are really under threat. And so if we'll zoom out one last time, Beth, we'll head back down I-40, go all the way down into West Tennessee, and we'll stop at Fayette County, just east of Memphis. And here we see a pretty concerning situation popping up too. Less urban and highly developed land than in Rutherford County, but still a significant amount. Lots of this low density residential development as people sprawl further and further out from Memphis. A few trends worth noting specifically in Fayette County. If you look in the southern part of the county and along the central part of the county, you see development sprawling out along key transportation corridors. I believe that's Highway 64 running through the middle of the county there. You see further growth coming out down around Collierville, coming out from Memphis. And you also see some growth up around I-40. Again, these aren't major surprises that growth is happening here, but the fact that it's happening so much is a real concern, especially for counties where, as Commissioner Hatcher said at the beginning, agriculture is really important for lots of these communities, for the entire state. And Beth, if you could zoom out just once more to the entire state level, and if you could go toward the top right corner of the map on the right, I wanted to just show everyone really quickly that you can look at the land cover map for Tennessee, but you can also click on a few different images. So you can look at satellite mapping to see how the actual view from satellites would be in terms of what you're seeing on the ground. And then if you could zoom back out again, Beth, just to the state level, and go to the standard map view. You can really see when this map changes that that orange and that red really pops throughout the state. And the last thing I'll note before I pass it back to Chris is that we highlighted 3 specific counties. You're obviously seeing lots of growth around Memphis and Nashville and Knoxville and Chattanooga, but you're seeing farmland conversion throughout the state. And this is a real big concern. Again, agriculture is important to Tennessee's economy, to its environment, to its culture and its people. And we've really got to start taking more proactive steps to safeguard the future of farming. Because if we don't, Tennesseans across the state, people and places, are going to be in a lot of trouble. So with that, I will pass it back to Chris, who's going to walk us through what we can do to help address farmland conversion in Tennessee.
Great. Thank you so much, Brooks. Thank you, Beth, for that expert navigation. I will remind folks, if you have questions, please do put them into the chat. And again, if you joined us late, you can put a question in by clicking on the questions tab of the control panel on the far right-hand side. You see a little square, and you just click on that. That pops the questions tab out, and you can put your question in there. We will save a little bit of time at the end for questions. But now that we've talked about the findings, we want to talk a minute or two about action and what each of us can do to help choose an abundant future. Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. If you are a county or a municipal official, a state legislator, a state agency employee, or a congressional staffer, we hope that you will find a recommendation in here that you might like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. If you are a farmer or a landowner or a community advocate, or you work for a farmer conservation organization, we encourage you to share and discuss these policy recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. Let me just highlight a few of the things that we discuss in the recommendations, and then I'm going to turn it over to Billy for some additional thoughts. So in the Encourage Smart Growth, smart growth and compact development requires a foundation of good local planning. Local comprehensive plans are where the rubber meets the road, especially when it comes to promoting compact development in rural areas. We encourage communities to engage in comprehensive planning. We encourage people to engage in the comprehensive plan process of drafting and reviewing it. And we encourage states to support comprehensive planning at the local level. Protecting agricultural land. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and landowners. More funding for that program would help to protect more farmland in Tennessee. Advancing smart solar siting. Again, as we talk about, we would like to see solar sited on the built environment and on marginal farmland and minimized on productive agricultural land. Local governments can also ensure that best practices are followed when siting solar on farmland. So this includes best practices around the construction of a solar facility, around its operation, and importantly, around its decommissioning, in order to preserve soil health, water resources, and the ability for someone to farm the land during and after the life of the project. States can also invest in additional research around agrivoltaics or dual-use solar and provide incentives for dual-use solar development. And lastly, on the supporting farmland access, the commissioner spoke about half of farmers being of retirement age and the need to recruit new farmers. One of the ways to do that is to help them access land. Very important to do that, and to help older farmers with succession planning and identifying potential successors, and with helping older landowners who might have land that they are looking to sell or to lease to a younger farmer. It's great to see that the Tennessee Department of Agriculture is a partner in the Tennessee Farm Link program. We encourage these kinds of farm linking efforts, and in providing the kind of assistance to both farm seekers and to older landowners and farmers to help with that succession planning and identifying a successor. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Billy now to talk more about planning for agriculture and a little bit about smart growth strategies.
Thanks, Chris. As Chris said, there are key strategies that American Farmland Trust recommends as best practices that have been taken from other places across the nation. And they include inventorying resources across your rural area. And this could certainly include your most productive, versatile, and resilient soils, blue line streams, watersheds, aquifers, historic or cultural resources, as well as scenic view sheds and large trees and tree stands. But perhaps most importantly, it's about engaging farmers in planning for the future of agriculture, engaging them in the process, in the planning process, in public meetings, and asking them what their vision is for the future of agriculture in that community. And that could include an economic impact study on the impacts of agriculture on that community. How many jobs, how much in payroll taxes is agriculture generating in that community? And how much in property taxes does agriculture pay? So all of those economic impacts are very important as you look at planning for the future of agriculture. And then as you incorporate ag into community plans, it's just really important to have an element of your comprehensive plan, if you have planning and zoning, to have an element for the conservation of agriculture. And this could be a chapter in a comprehensive plan. This could also be a rural land management plan itself that could be adopted as part of your comprehensive plan, or it could be adopted by your local government entity if you don't have planning and zoning, to just serve as a guiding document for your rural area. And then the implementation of the tools to retain and protect agricultural land. Chris touched on some of those, but if we go to our next slide, I think we can go into those a little bit deeper. So these are not prescriptive recommendations. They're just best practices that have been used in other places across the nation. Urban growth boundaries, to separate the urban area from the rural area so that you're containing all of your non-agricultural uses in a very compact, contiguous way. You're providing sanitary sewer, storm sewer, sidewalks, all the urban services that would typically be provided. And then outside of that boundary, this is your ag area. These are your core agricultural activities. These are your best soils, your most productive, versatile, and resilient soils. And agricultural zoning is very important. Zoning that supports agribusinesses, agritourism, and agricultural production, but prohibits non-agricultural uses. Large lot minimums in rural areas and agricultural areas goes directly to the low density residential development that we've been speaking about during the presentation today. And this will be unique to your own community. Your community will decide what a viable agricultural unit is. And it could be 40 acres, 50 acres, 30 acres. The list goes on, but I think generally most folks in agriculture know what a viable agricultural lot is and what a lot is for a McMansion or some type of non-conforming lot that is really not built for agriculture. In those non-conforming lots, the LDR in rural areas are usually on septic, which presents a whole nother host of issues. Farmland protection programs, either state or local, this could be a local or state PACE, purchase of agricultural conservation easement program, or a purchase of development rights program, or PDR. AFT has worked very hard to secure federal funding for farmland protection. That's a whole nother subject, but those are federal matching dollars that are available to local or state governments. So you can leverage that local investment and get a one-to-one return on investment for the local taxpayer. And then land trust. I know that Tennessee has the amazing Land Trust for Tennessee. We work closely with them, and I was just with several of their staff at an event in Alabama not too long ago. And having a viable land trust in your state or in your community is critically important. And that land trust can take donated easements. There's also legislation that allows land trusts to now purchase conservation easement and allows them to access the federal funding that I was just speaking about a minute ago. American Farmland Trust is a land trust, and we do hold conservation easements across the country. And we have a land protection team, but typically we only hold conservation easements or accept gifts of land when there's no other viable entity in place. So we're not creating redundancy. And quite candidly, American Farmland Trust helped to establish over 100 PACE and PDR programs across the nation and over 40 private land trusts. So we don't want to duplicate those efforts where there are existing boots on the ground. And then next, a goal for permanent farmland protection in a comprehensive plan, or quite simply just in your community that is codified in some way in local ordinances or so forth. Having a goal is critically important to galvanize your community and to catalyze moving towards this goal. And what's exciting about establishing a goal in your community is that you're going to look at farmland that's perhaps already protected. In the case of Tennessee, doing an assessment and to see how many acres are already protected in your community by the Land Trust for Tennessee or some other easement holding entity. And then dovetailing that existing amount into what your new goal will be. The goal is also important because all of your agricultural interests in that community will come together and assign a goal, establish a goal to retain your existing agricultural industries, but also to retain them in your community and to expand your agribusinesses and your agritourism. So the goal is very important. The goal is also important for a third reason, and that is that quite simply, there's land that should be protected for the future of agriculture, and that's what our work is all about. That's what this report is all about. But there is also land that may not be suitable for agriculture, and that land is also identified in this same process as you're establishing a permanent goal for farmland protection. And so if you have a community that has, 150,000 acres in its rural area, your leadership may decide that, we need 100,000 of that 150,000 acres to retain and grow our existing agricultural industries and agribusinesses and agritourism, which would leave 50,000 acres. We're not suggesting that all of those acres are going to be developed, but it does open the conversation for smart growth strategies that we've been talking about, so that it's a balance, between the urban and the rural. And now I think we'd like to stop here and take a few questions. Chris, do we have some questions?
Great. We have, thank you so much, Billy. We do have one. And the question is, based on this mapping and this information, what types of farms do you think are most likely to be affected? And why don't we start with Brooks, and then Billy, if you have more to add, feel free.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a great
question.
question.
And you know what? And before we do it, let's all go back on camera, including the commissioner, because we're also going to give him a chance for a couple of last thoughts. So if we can all go back on camera. Okay, and then Brooks, take it away, and then Billy, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so again, great question. And we talked a little bit about the types of agricultural land being impacted. We talked about pasture land versus woodland versus cropland. Quickly, I'll say that, one thing that we've seen, and as you saw as we dove throughout the maps in the different counties, you see a lot of development happening near cities, whether they're smaller towns or whether they're bigger cities. And traditionally throughout Tennessee, we've seen a lot of our smaller and mid-sized farms located fairly close to those urban or more suburban areas. And so since sprawl is happening in that way, it's coming out and out and out from these more urban communities. One trend that I think we're seeing is that a lot of development in Tennessee, throughout the South and other parts of the U.S. is disproportionately impacting small and mid-sized farms. So those farms that might be 40 or 50 acres to 2 or 3 or 400 acres. And so we see those farms being hit especially hard in a lot of these communities.
Great.
And Chris, this is a Tennessee audience, so I'm going to yield my time to Commissioner Hatcher to respond to that question.
Great, and while Commissioner, let me just jump in that if you would like to have, since we're close to being out of time, if you have any sort of final thoughts that you would like to leave us all with, we would welcome those.
Well, I was sitting here thinking about that. I think, in any major initiative, we have to get the ag and forestry industry in lockstep on this. And so it would, for the strategies moving forward, the preventative strategies, for them to endorse. In other words, step by step go through that. And then if we can get that collaboration and that amount of synergy with that many organizations, that carries a big weight. But if we try to do it without that grassroots backup, then it'll go awry. I mean, if we go in it, if I just say, well, I'm so I wanted to push this myself, it'd fall flat. I mean, I think the strategies are spot on. We just have to get the stakeholders, all the stakeholders, to step behind them and push them. And then we still may have a fight on our hands with the other side of that, the people that don't really see what we see.
Right. That is very helpful and very well spoken. So thank you very much, Commissioner, for joining us. We really appreciate that. Let me just, before I hand it over to Billy for the final word, let me just mention two of the resources that are on this page. The first is American Farmland Trust Farmland Information Center. That is a wealth of information about everything from state policies to, they do have examples of comprehensive plans that have been done with a lot of forethought for agriculture. There's information about statistics, many things that you might find helpful. And I'm seeing here a comment from someone who is here with the Southeast Tennessee Young Farmers, who is just saying that they have access to a network of young farmers across the state and would love to be supportive. So thank you so much for letting us know that, Emma and we will be in touch. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, the National Agricultural Land Network is something that we hope that everybody will join and will find useful in helping to think through how to reduce the footprint of development on our best farmland. And with that, Billy, I'm turning it back to you to close us out.
We want to thank everyone for joining us today, particularly Commissioner Hatcher. Thank you for your valuable time, for your leadership, and for your insights on this important issue. For everyone that's attended today, please engage in these conversations in your local communities and at the state level. Start the conversation in your community if it's not happening already. Use American Farmland Trust as your resource. We're happy to provide all the resources that we can provide that we have here at AFT. And also, I'll say, getting yourself elected to a planning commission or to a board of adjustment, those are two ways that you can have the greatest impact on your community other than running for some other office. Serving on a planning commission, serving on a board of adjustment, critically important to provide that leadership at the local level. You have a great system and infrastructure in place there in Tennessee already, and American Farmland Trust is here to support you. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.